and jump into the tracker, can we see this Year 10 English AQA tracker here? Fantastic. So on that light touch with data entry, for those that aren't familiar, there's two ways that you can do it. We recommend that you sort of enter your data in the first instance on the Pupil Progress trackers. The reason for this is that it kind of helps with, you don't need to maintain your own separate place. And also it stops that double data entry. So the way to enter the data into the trackers in the first instance is simply by pressing the cell and marking as you go along. Once you've added the marks, that is all you need to do. And the tracker calculates your score out of the paper, as well as the grade out of the paper. The grade boundaries that we have for the trackers come from the grade boundaries that you've set. So you can access this by going on to the tools. And you'll see here, you've got the June 2023 paper. Here we can change this, maybe add a percentage tolerance if you like, or we can keep it as it is. The second way to add data onto the trackers is through the bulk edit. If you already have your data separately somewhere else currently, what you need to do is make sure that your students are in the right order as on your spreadsheet, and then we can bulk upload. And that is again through the tools and go on to the bulk edit option. This changes the tracker to be ready to take in that data that you're about to paste in. And it's as simple as copying what you have and pasting straight into these cells here. Then you would save the changes. And that's kind of that's that quick touch on data entry, just to make sure we're all on the same page. Once we have the data on there, we then have a couple of tools that have been sort of automatic for us. The first is that with each question that you've put in a mark, it is tagged to its topic that is pulled into the topic summary. So as a class or a year group, you can instantly find trends within your own class on where your strengths lie and where you might need some extra work. Where PiXL Waves comes into this with the snapshot, we've taken a snapshot of our trackers sort of as they are here across all of our PiXL Waves schools. And what that has allowed us to do is, especially with the topic summary, is have an average here for you to compare your results to our PiXL cohort results as well. To access that, we would go onto the tools, and we would go down here where we've got compare to PiXL Waves and select the most recent. You could even select January if you wanted to, but I'm just going to select the most recent one, the July 2024, which was the Year 10 PiXL Waves snapshot that we did in July. That adds an extra row onto here that shows us our comparison. There is a difference here with English and maths. Because English is a repeatable structure, we can actually have a mark for mark comparison here, because we know that every English paper has question 1 is 4 marks and relates to AO1, question 2 is 8 marks and relates to AO2, and so on and so forth. So because we know that that structure is repeated across all the papers, we can have that mark for mark comparison from the questions, and also that average in the topic summary as well. This is slightly different than maths. With maths, because we've got the freedom and the flexibility for schools to sit the paper that best suits their needs, we can't have that mark for mark comparison because it's not really indicative of the average there, because other people may have sat different papers. Although the majority of schools did sit the summer 2023 paper in the previous waves, this still gives you that flexibility for what suits your school. And here for the maths, we have the comparison in the topic summary and the subtopic summary here as well. When we look at so this average here, where we can get value here is two ways. First is actually identifying the areas in which you have excelled the national average, because it's really important to celebrate those wins within your schools. You know, it's a stressful time, so identifying where you've done well helps for your morale, but also it helps you identify what activities you did for those topics that created that success. Is there something specific for my dummy school, for instance, that they did for AO1 that we can replicate in our other topics? Same with AO6, we've done above the national average here. Is there something that we've done specifically for this topic that maybe we can replicate against the others? And then we can also identify the areas where we have sort of fallen under the national average here and start remedying that gap, and maybe identifying which students we can work on specifically to close that gap and get us to the national average or even better above. So some tips and tricks on how to do this is If we, and you can do this across the subjects and the topics, the questions and the topics, sorry, but if we click on AO4 for this example, in my dummy school, we can filter all my students from the lowest to the highest percentages for this topic. And here we can just zero in on those specific students rather than having to look at a cohort of 200, we can get a list of 20 and work on those 20 students across the classes in that year group. The way we can identify them and keep track is, and actually put in that strategic work, is through using the tagging feature here to really follow those students. And what I mean by that is we've got the tagging toggle here. And if you click on the toggle, you can configure a tag. I've done this ahead of time. I've added AO4 intervention, but to add tags, you would go on configure, create a new tag and fill this out. What I can do here now is I can tag these students that have got a 5% for AO4. So if I go and tag these students here, just really quickly, there we go. We've got these students here. I can then use the filtering system to get those students sort of as my only view. So that again condenses that 200 students. Now I've got around 12 here to really focus on. What I can do is I can copy the student list and send it off for intervention. Or for those schools that have our app and our whole school and can send reports off to your students, you can use the link-in feature here to send out AO4 specific resources to these students to study. So again, I've just reconfigured this. This was a bite-sized sort of video that I found on BBC Bitesize, but of course this, you can use the PiXL resources that have been provided in the reports and other ways for, or even homework. So by clicking on these students, we just select them all actually, we can then push this link out to the students through the parent or student app, and they can start studying this and start working on AO4 specifically. An example of the kind of difference this makes is if we just close this linking, close this filtering, if I go into these students and just try and understand what difference I can actually make with them. Say we are now doing our second set of assessments and these students have made an improvement now from the last time they've sat this paper. Some may have made incremental changes, some may have made quite large changes since the last time that they did this paper. If we then go and look at the national comparison again and the entire cohort comparison, we'll see what difference that has made for those students. So if we then get rid of this filter, what we can see is we've closed that gap quite significantly by focusing on that group of students rather than having sort of been blinded by the entire cohort. And that kind of sort of demonstrates that laser focus on which students do we support with which topic. And we can do this across all of our topics as well that we need support with. We can use these filtering from lowest to highest to identify those students. We can also do those, especially for English, where you have very mark-heavy questions. You can do that for the questions. So say with content and organization, we've got a 24-mark question and most of our students aren't getting half the marks for this. We can then filter from lowest to highest to start getting those students that we can get the most gains out of and support them specifically. Sort of moving on from here, we can also use the subject level analysis to understand our subgroup gaps. So if I go onto the tools toggle and go to my subject analysis here, what I'll see is a breakdown of the department and how my classes are doing compared to their minimum target grades. So for instance, here I can see in my classes, the percentage of off target, 1 grade away, on target and above target. I can also see the grade accumulative breakdown, which can show me how many students are at specific grade and above. For instance, if my school is really interested and focused on getting a 4 and above for English, I can see that 65% of my students are at a 4 and above. If all of my students were meeting their minimum target grades, this number would look like 97% of my students would be at 4 and above. When we go down to the bottom here, we can also see our subgroups. And this is where we can start looking at the PiXL Waves report and comparing our results to the PiXL national average. So in the PiXL report for English, there was no actual sort of noticeable difference between the male and female students. When we're looking at my dummy school, we can actually see that there is a difference between those subgroups. And what can we do to identify this and put in the remedies to close that gap so that there is no male-female gap here? We can do that by going back onto our trackers and filtering for these students. And this isn't just for the male and females. We can do this with prior retainers. We can see that there is a gap in our higher prior retainers, or we can do this even with our pupil premiums. For instance, in my dummy school, we don't have any pupil premiums on target. We can go back onto the tracker and see where we can support the students in this. So just lost it there for a second. Let's get back on there. So if we go on to the filters, I'm going to use the higher prior retainers as an example here. We can go onto the filters and we can filter by student and select that subgroup. So we can go higher prior retainers and add that filter. We can also sort of narrow this down further by only looking at my high prior retainers that are either off target or 1 grade away from their target as well. So if we go on summary grade, 1 grade and off target here, again, we filter down that large list of students into a smaller list. And when we're looking at this at the classroom base as well, we will get a much smaller list of condensed students that we can start really supporting. When we're looking here, we can see again for my higher prior retainers that AO4 is a problem area for them, that we can really get some of those marks again. When we're looking at AO4, that's a 20-mark question, and we're getting under half of those marks. So we could be working with 10+ marks here for these students. When we go to the end of the tracker, we can also see the target grid. And we can see that there's 14, 10, 5, 7, 9. That this is kind of the range of marks that we're working on. So if we want to get our students moving towards this side, we're looking for these big mark questions to work on them with so that we can make up that difference. Here again, we can add a AO4 intervention class and set those students up for intervention. We can also take a snapshot at this point and at the end of our first assessments, put in our interventions and then take a snapshot in the second set of assessments. And then we can compare those. Has there been an improvement since the last assessment? Has my intervention plans actually seen a classroom impact from what we've been doing? There's also, on top of this, the material that we get from the PiXL Waves report. So a lot of this was very tracker focused. For each of the PiXL Waves, there is a separate report giving us a summary for English and maths. I'm just going to look at the English one really quickly with you. One of the findings and then something that they've noticed is that for AQA, there was a difference between the marks for question 1, paper 2 and question 1, paper 1, which ultimately is testing the same AO. So what is the difference between the questions in these two papers that we're not getting the same sort of achievement in? When we go back to the tracker with that, we can see that that trend doesn't show up in my school. But if it did show up in your school, you can start to identify the students that this has been different for and identify what was it about the question, what was it about the content that sort of stopped them from getting the same amount of marks there. Another thing that's mentioned in the reports is actually understanding where a 0 mark is coming from. Was the 0 from a non-attempt? Was the 0 from sort of a half attempt? Maybe they didn't have time to finish the question. Or was this sort of a gap in knowledge for the content, and that's where the 0 has come from? And again, the way you can sort of identify these students and keep track of these remedies is by using the filters and using the tags. So if we go on to, for instance, critical evaluation 20 marks, and we filter our students down from lowest to highest, where you have 0s, you can start identifying where those 0s have come from, especially with these big mark questions. Why was there no attempt if there was no attempt? Or why was there a gap in knowledge? And we can do that by going again on the tags, configure, and I'll add the no attempt rather than AO4. And here we can then tag the students that didn't attempt that question. Or if there was another issue, half attempt, didn't finish the question, you can add that tag on there to keep track of those students. Next time around, did they attempt the question? How many marks did they get from attempting the question? Finally, I want to talk about the resources that are provided for you on the PiXL report. So when we're going, for instance, this section here, we actually have the Strive for Success in English Language link, where we go onto the PiXL platform, and there's varying levels of resources on there. But if you're identifying certain aspects within your cohort where you sort of want to remedy and start putting some intervention in, start putting some extra work and resources in, we have the resource dictionary at the bottom, which sort of has a bit about everything here. So if for whichever place and topic you identify, you can find the resources at the bottom here just by clicking on that link, and it should take you there. I don't have a PiXL account, but you would then log into your PiXL portal and access those resources. And really, the idea here is that we're diagnosing the issue and actually then remedying it as well. Finally, just something I wanted to go over, especially if you are new with Pupil Progress, is the grade summary. I know for a lot of schools that getting a 4 and above for both English and maths is a really big focus, or some are even trying to stretch and challenge and getting a 5 and above for both English and maths, as we discussed in the PiXL conference. You can sort of use the grade analysis here to keep track of this, because when you're tagging students in one place, you can make those tags follow those students into their subjects, which allows teachers to be notified of certain attributes. For instance, a maths teacher may be notified that the student is obtaining a 4 or 5 and above in English, but isn't for maths. So maybe they need just a bit of extra support in maths so they can get that 4 and above in both subjects. We can do that again by going on to the filters. And I've done this ahead of time. I've created a filter for AQA, which is U to 3, and Maths Edexcel 4 to 9, which means that I've got a Maths not English group of students here. I can then open my tags, and I've added this ahead of time, Maths not English, and tag these students. This means that when I go into my maths classes, I can actually filter out the students that have maths and not English, and vice versa. In my English classes, I can filter out those students that only need that 4 and above in my English class to have that 4 and above in all. I hope this was helpful. The idea really is that we're getting that classroom impact from the information that we're getting and from your assessment data, and using the tools that we have on here to really get that maximum benefit and play around really a little bit with what we can do with the trackers, because there's different ways that you can use these tools, and it's more of a suggestion of tips and tricks than a tutorial or a how-to book. This gives us a bit of time now to go into questions if there was any.